Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Tom Watkins, and I'm Vice President for Cox Business Virginia. Welcome to the Cox Business Executive Discussion Series. And I'd ask you to do something as we start this meeting. Picture your life 12 months ago. And now look ahead to 3 months from now. With the worst of the pandemic behind us, we hope that recovery is underway. For some, this period still carries personal and professional challenges that we continue to manage and overcome. For others, what has transpired in the last year brought much introspection and perhaps opened some new opportunities. Well, today we'll examine what back to work looks like post-COVID and the impact that it will have on business leaders and employees alike. As always, it's our goal that you come away from today's discussion with perspectives, ideas, and resources that will support your businesses and our communities at large. The Executive Discussion Series is not possible without our partners at Inside Business. We thank Steve Miller and his team for developing this discussion together with us and for bringing it to a wider Virginia audience that now covers Hampton Roads, Northern Virginia, Roanoke, and neighboring locations. I also want to take a minute to thank our distinguished panel for sharing their insights and expertise with us today. And speaking of new opportunities, I am delighted to introduce our moderator, Kathy Lewis. As you know, Kathy is one of Hampton Roads' most veteran media personalities and professionals. With expertise in civil discourse, community engagement, and communication, she's also a popular speaker, reader, and facilitator of corporate and community conversations. Now add to that, podcast. What an impressive list, Kathy. Well, this month, Kathy is launching her new venture, The Kathy Lewis Show, an informative and entertaining look at the issues and the ideas that define modern life. To learn more, please visit her website, kathylewis.com. Kathy, as always, thank you so much for moderating the series. Our heartfelt congratulations on your new venture, and I turn it over to you.
Well, Tom, thank you so much. And I'll tell you, it's interesting. The decision to do this now really did grow out of the COVID experience, just kind of thinking through what life was going to look like on the other side of that and what issues people were going to want to talk about and what formats they're going to want to talk about that in. So I'm so glad you talked about the idea that this has been a terrible time for so many people. And it's also been a time of great introspection for lots of folks. And that introspection continues today. I'm talking with lots of people who are really thinking through whether and how they want to go back to the workplaces that they left abruptly in March. And, I know the term back to work is very comfortable for everybody. We all know what we're talking about when we say that. But I always like to say, the truth of it is we've been working all along, and it's really, it's important to remember that. The question that we're considering today, and boy, we have lots of great questions from our audience and tremendous speakers today. But the questions that we'll be considering today is, how do we look at work on the other side of this pandemic, noting that we are not quite on the other side of it, but we definitely seem to be emerging. And so that is good news indeed. I did an event last night. It was outdoors. It was the first time for this local organization in Norfolk, an organization of professional young people. And there was a moment that I imagine that many people are having where I got to meet in person someone I've been working remotely with for a year. Never met her before the pandemic. We started working together, and it was such a delight to see her in person. But I'm imagining, and I'm hearing from lots of people who are saying, they are having that experience as well. So all of these reunions are fantastic to be happening. And so we're talking in mid-June when things look, as you note, Tom, a lot better than they did a year ago at this time. And I'm so glad you're joining us today because we have some hot off the presses information for you, which will be shared by Ann Bebo, who's a partner at Van Deventer Black Law Firm, and she is a specialist, really one of the best there is in labor and employment law. Ann, great to have you with us this morning. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So this is really current information, and this is why you always want a lawyer on the panel when you're talking about workplace issues. We've all been having this discussion, Ann, around whether employers can require people to be vaccinated in order to come back to the work site. But there's been an interesting legal decision on that this week.
Right. So over the weekend, a judge in Texas issued a decision. What had happened was the Houston Methodist Hospital had ordered all of its employees to become vaccinated, and they set a deadline, and they said, if you're not vaccinated by this date, you won't be working here anymore. And when the date came, they gave those employees who weren't vaccinated a 2-week suspension and said, either get vaccinated in that 2-week period or your employment is over. 117 employees refused to get vaccinated and filed a lawsuit against the company, against the hospital, saying it was a wrongful termination, a violation of public policy. And the federal court dismissed the case over the weekend and issued an opinion that basically said, this is not experimental. It's not wrongful for your employer to require you to get the vaccine, and you have a choice. You either get the vaccine or you find another employment, and that's your choice. And so the case was dismissed. I think that the plaintiffs also didn't do themselves any favor by using some very charged hyperbolic arguments, such as comparing the vaccination program with Nazi Germany medical experiments, and that really enraged the judge, and that was pretty apparent in the opinion. But this is what legal experts have been saying all along, that employers do have the right to mandate vaccinations in the workplace. You have to make exceptions if an individual might have a disability or a sincerely held religious belief. You might need to make an accommodation for them, but by and large, you can require vaccinations.
That's really interesting, and I'm really glad we're talking about that right off the bat, because a lot of people have been very interested in rulings around that issue. You mentioned that that was a federal ruling. Could you talk just a moment about the intersection of federal and state law around these issues? What takes precedence?
Sure. Well, the decision, even though it was a federal court, he was applying Texas law. That's where the case took place. And employment law is a mix of state and federal law. The employees had sued that was a wrongful termination under Texas law. So that was the main law he was applying. But federal law is really clear that you can require your employees to get vaccinations. And there's nothing in Virginia law that contradicts that. So I think that even in Virginia, a court would reach a very similar decision.
That is really interesting. So Ann Bebo is with us. If you have questions about the law as it relates to returning to the work site, please let us know. We have opportunities in the question area for you to ask those questions. Before we go on, though, I'd love for us to take a quick poll. Sarah Kingsley with us today from Inside Business, and she does such a great job of keeping us all connected and keeping us all muted when you're not supposed to be talking and unmuted when you are, which I will confess 15 months into this is still a challenge for me. Not a day goes by that I don't fail to unmute myself. So that's my goal in this whole process. So our first poll question, Sarah, why don't we do the one that talks about how you want to go back to work? Do you want to go back to work hybrid? Do you want to work from home? Do you want to work in person and in the office only? Give us a sense of that. Pick the one that best fits your desires and your situation. And in just about 30 seconds, we'll look at those results. I was talking with somebody, we were having this conversation with a client yesterday, and it was very interesting because there was one man who said, look, guys, I have to get back to the because I have a 4-year-old and he's working in a very sort of creative kind of job. And he really felt like he needed the ability to close a door and get his work done. And with daycare shortages, which we know are taking place in some areas across the Commonwealth, that certainly is an issue. And then there were others who said, you know, I'm really liking working from home, and that will be a factor for me as I move forward and think about my next career path. And it'll be interesting to see on our call today whether folks are expecting to experience that issue, people wanting to work from home, as a spur or as an incentive to look for another type of job on the other side of this pandemic, one that will allow them to do that in a very tight labor market. Okay, Sarah, let's go ahead and check the results and see where people are on this question of how you want to go back to work.
71% of folks have voted, and right now we have 66 would like to do hybrid, 66%, 24% would like to work from home, and 9% would like to do in-person or office only.
That is really interesting, and I think it probably you know, we could probably adjust that as well, I suspect, for the type of work that you do. So if you do client-facing work, you know, you might give a different answer in that circumstance. Thanks for that, Sarah. I appreciate it. So we're talking today again about how we go back to the work site, whether that's an office or whether it's some other work site. Paula Hogg directs talent management for the Hampton Roads Sanitation District, and she has workers working in all kinds of different settings. Paula, great to have you with us today. Appreciate it. I am not hearing Paula. Is everybody else hearing Paula? All right, Paula, I'm going to come back to you, because for some reason I am not hearing you. So I'm going to come back to you in just a moment, if that's okay. Gay Cororiton is a state. Oh, there we go. I heard somebody.
Yeah.
Was that you, Paula? All
Yeah.
right, there we go. So Paula, how is this playing out for you within HRSD? Because you're in a situation where you have people certainly working in the office, but you also have people working in the field as well. How is this back to the work site situation playing out for you?
Yeah, so HRSD is responsible for regional wastewater treatment. We have over 860 employees. So many of them have been on site through the pandemic, and they, you know, we consider our employees are essential workers. We have had over 200 working partially or fully remotely throughout the pandemic. So we are, you know, for many operational employees, things are very much the same, but for those working in the office, we're really trying to look at what has worked. And in many positions, remote work or a hybrid model of remote work has been very efficient. It gives our employees flexibility. So we're really trying to look at those things that have worked well for us. So we have.
And is that something you did previously, Paula? In other words, were you letting people work remotely before, or was that kind of a paradigm shift brought on by the urgency of the pandemic, and now you're sort of looking around going, hey, maybe some of this isn't so bad?
Well, we had some telework and telework agreements, but we really expanded that and became much more flexible with it and just converted to it. And it really was a great paradigm shift in many cases because it was more efficient and everything. So I think the pandemic facilitated our outlook on remote work.
Are you hearing from people who are saying, look, I really must work remotely or I cannot continue to do this job? I mean, I wonder, are you hearing from people who are making decisions about whether to continue their employment based on what the policies are going to be? I read an interesting piece in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend that talked about people who are just quitting, who are, you know, maybe they're near the end of their career anyway, and they were going to retire in a year or so, and they're just like, I don't want to do this anymore. What are you hearing from people who are making those kinds of evaluative judgments?
We haven't, and I think we're trying to be very flexible with allowing remote work where it works. And so I think that has helped in that situation. And of course, you know, it's clear on an operational level at the treatment plants that that's not going to work for those jobs. But we are as flexible as we can be with remote work and with the hours where we can
That's
be. So as long as we can operate and continue business, and we've actually gained some efficiencies, and I think the flexibility has served us well.
Gay Kororitan is with us as well today. She is the senior economist and director of housing and commercial research for the National Association of Realtors. Gay, good to have you with us today. I know so much focus has been put on the commercial real estate market. If we have all of these people who are telecommuting from their homes, what are you learning that may mean for commercial real estate in general? Are we going to see the kind of footprints we've seen to date?
Well, first of all, let me say that the data that we're seeing is that the fraction of workers working from home continues to go down. So things are still evolving. Back in April of last year, as high as about 35% of the workforce was working from home. That continues to go down. It does remain more elevated for people who are in computer and technical. About half of them are still there. But right now also what we're seeing is from the commercial data that we're looking at, vacancy rates are still up. And I was just looking at the Northern Virginia area. They've gone up to about I think 17%. So rents though have not come down. The effective asking rents are still pretty much stable. What companies are doing is giving more concessions rather than lowering their rates. And I think because, as you said, people are still evaluating, right? Are they going to have the workforce come back to the office, or are they going to adopt hybrid? So effective asking rates are still the same. Certainly, there's been a lot of decline in office occupancy just in the Northern Virginia alone. Northern Virginia, 500,000 of square foot of office space has been vacated. In the DC area, DC area, 1.6 million. So that's 2 million of office space. And so that will take time, to sort of unwind or to get back to normal. And it will depend on the work from home policies of the tech, I would say really the tech companies that are in the Northern Virginia area. So again, Northern Virginia is very tech intensive. 20% of the workforce is in tech. Nationally, that's just 10%. But so I was just researching, who are the big tech companies in Northern Virginia? Northrop Grumman is one. Of course, people have adopted to it, but it seems like, it's not the first best solution for them. I think, right?
So Gay,
it's not like a first best. It's not like the first best policy is remote. It'll be, let's go back to the office, but if you really need a reason to work remote, then we can accommodate it. So I think that's what I'm seeing from the offices in the DC area.
So if your lease were expiring, say, a year or so from now, your anticipation is that those folks are going to have perhaps a different scenario. They're going to have a little more knowledge of how this is played out as a practical matter. And then the market, I would imagine, will be coming up with other options that accommodate the changing ways that people are working.
Yes. So, certainly, as I said, the policy is still evolving, but if a worker says, I can't work from home right now, I can't find daycare, or, it's going to be part of, I think, rather than just a work from home, but part of this shift in culture to a better work-life balance. And I think Microsoft is trying to set that trend, right? So they said, we're going to allow you to work from home because we want you to have a better work-life balance. And certainly that's one way to attract talent,
I always think that's funny, though, when they talk about a better work-life balance, because I'm also hearing from people who say working from home has given them no work-life balance. We're always at work. I heard somebody say it's not working from home, it's living at work. That's sort of the
Right.
other way to think about it. So, you know, this is not just a real estate issue we have to think through, and it's not just a legal issue we need to think through. It really is a cultural issue about how we think about work and the boundaries, you know, each person is going to feel like they need to establish around that. We're so glad to have Rachel Patton with us today with the Southwest Virginia Workforce Development Board. She directs business solutions for workforce readiness there. Rachel, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. So one of the things we keep hearing about is shortage of workers, particularly in service industries. We're heading now into the summer. We're all over the Commonwealth of Virginia, which is the best place in the world to visit, as we all know. We are having tourism shortages. And I know workforce boards like yours were really instrumental during the pandemic in helping people who had determined as a result of their reflection that they needed perhaps to get out of the food service industry or out of the industry that they had been in. Workforce boards like yours were really instrumental in giving them the training to do a new thing. So how are things looking from your perspective in terms of trying to create great jobs and help connect people with those jobs?
Well, certainly before we got into COVID in the Commonwealth, we were looking at labor shortages across the state. And so I think as we transition out of COVID, we're certainly going to be back in that situation. You're correct. A lot of individuals that were working in the hospitality industry took that time that they were out of work during COVID to retrain and pursue something in another industry. So we are seeing shortages, or I guess a workforce shift out of that industry. And I think you'll can continue to see that in with some of the essential workers, our frontline healthcare workers. You're going to see some fatigue there, and you're going to see them shift maybe into telemedicine or another maybe another healthcare field. So I think there's certainly going to be some of those shifts that are going to go on. At the beginning of June, the Virginia Employment Commission reinstated the work search requirement for individuals that were currently receiving unemployment insurance benefits. So, you know, as that goes, they are now required to be actively searching for work. And so, so I think as the summer goes on, you are going to continue to see individuals transition back into the workplace. Certainly, we are working with businesses to help them, you know, fill that pipeline of workers that they're looking for. And then, you know, also there's still a huge number of families that have one parent or another. And I think Gay spoke to this, out of the workforce because of lack of childcare during the pandemic. That was such a struggle in different places across the Commonwealth that one parent or the other had to make the decision to come out of the workforce to help care for children that weren't currently in school. And so, you know, as we get closer to fall and you really see concrete plans from school systems, I think you'll start seeing parents transition back into the workplace. So yeah, it's certainly an interesting time. So it's just going to take time to fill some of those industries where there's been a lot of openings, and certainly the hospitality industry is one of those.
Yeah, it's a great point, and we're seeing that all over town in Southeast Virginia. I know you're seeing it at Southwest Virginia, and of course that requirement to look for work is likely to make some difference. I have heard a lot of folks talking about this additional pandemic relief, the $300 a week, and the impact of that on people returning to work. I think you brought up such a good point, Rachel, when you talked about, and this, I think a lot of people forget about this, that childcare is not readily available for many people right now. And so that $300 a week is letting those parents stay home until that childcare becomes available. But I know it's a very, very controversial subject, and I know there's been expressed some interest in rolling that back, and different states, I think, have done that in an effort to try to get people back to some of these lower wage jobs. So that'll be an interesting thing to watch play itself out. We'd love to have your questions, your thoughts, your comments. Sarah, why don't we do another poll question? I'm going to let you go ahead and tell us what that is, put it on the screen, and tell us what that poll question is.
All right, we would like to know, do you understand your rights as an employee or an employer about vaccine requirements? Yes, no, or somewhat, but you would like to learn more.
Okay, very good. So, so that is the question before you. Do you know your rights when it comes to vaccine requirements? And is that that making a difference for you? My sense is it's not only the vaccine development and the more rapid approach, I think, than a lot of people had expected on that of distribution, but also the social distancing requirements that have made a huge difference. The easing of some of those social distancing requirements that had been very problematic for folks who had shared employee offices. And so one of the other questions we want to know from the audience, and you can just put this in the chat, has to do with whether you anticipate that your workplace will do a bigger rethink on how people are situated. In other words, do you think we're going to be in some of these, large spaces with multiple cubicles? Do you think we're going to have more closed door offices? What do you think about that? We'd love to hear from you in the chat on that. All right, let's go ahead and get those results, Sarah.
So 75% of the attendees have voted. 39% say yes, they understand their rights. 15% say no, and 46% say somewhat, but they would like to learn more.
Wow. That's really interesting. Let's go to Ann Bebo, because a couple of questions coming out of the audience that I want to make sure that we get Ann to weigh in on. Ann Bebo is an extremely excellent labor and employment law attorney at Van Deventer Black. One question has to do with Ann with whether there's any update on VOSHA standards changing in Virginia with regard to COVID, and then I'll get the next one after you finish that one.
Sure, we've all been waiting to see what VOSHA is going to do. The permanent standard came out in January, and that requires that all employees in most situations wear face masks and socially distance. As we all know, the governor, when he issued his executive order at the end of May, said if you're fully vaccinated, you don't have to wear a face mask or socially distance anymore, in accordance with the latest CDC guidance. VOSHA has not modified its standard, but because of the governor's executive order, it's now pretty much safe for employers in most circumstances and most businesses. Now there's some exceptions for certain types of industries, but most businesses, for employers to say you're to the fully vaccinated workforce, you don't have to wear face masks anymore and you don't have to socially distance. But the unvaccinated employees are still subject to all the other requirements of the VOSH standard. And then the remaining requirements of the VOSH standard would still apply to the business and even to the fully vaccinated employees. So in short, we're still waiting for VOSH to do something. They haven't done it yet. They move kind of slowly. I just checked the website again this morning and it said new, and I was all excited. Something happened. And the new was the January announcement that they had issued a permanent standard. So
Wow.
5 months ago.
Okay. Yeah, all righty then. So this is a really interesting question about that court ruling. And this questioner raises a great point. And just to be clear, I think if you look at the reasons people resist the vaccine, a small percentage of them resist because it is under emergency use and they are awaiting the moment when it is fully authorized, or I don't know what the terminology is for that, but when it's not emergency use but fully authorized. And so the question has to do with whether that legal argument is as cut and dry in other industries as it might be in the healthcare industry. That obviously, if you have people whose job it is to take care of sick people, then even without full FDA approval, you could certainly make that argument. But what about for other industries, considering that I think they're all still under, there may be one that's not under emergency use, but many of them are still under emergency use authorizations? In
terms of whether or not an employer can require the employees to have the vaccine, it doesn't matter that it's under emergency use. And that's true whether your business is in the healthcare industry or not. Any business can require its employees to be fully vaccinated. What I found, though, in my experience in speaking with my clients and businesses, is that many businesses are reluctant to mandate vaccines because of the labor shortages that we talked about earlier in this presentation. they don't want to lose employees. They're having a hard time recruiting. They're having a hard time retaining. They're afraid if they mandate the vaccine, it's going to push people out the door. So a lot of businesses are taking the approach of, we encourage but do not require vaccination. And then they will often require the employees to let us know if you are vaccinated, so that we then know you don't have to wear a face mask anymore. But that would be medical information that they have to keep confidential, of course. But that's what I'm finding, that even though you can mandate vaccines, most employers are opting not to.
That is really interesting. So I'm going to go around the Brady Bunch box on this. The question is, what do you think it's going to look like 3 to 5 years from now? I know that, golly, if you asked us to do that 18 months ago, we never would have had COVID on our bingo card, as they say. So that is a hard thing to do. But given what we know now about labor shortages, about people's interest, obvious interest, at least on this call, in doing a hybrid sort of return to work, and industries in willingness or lack of willingness to think that through and make some accommodations there. What do you think the workplace looks like in 3 to 5 years? Gay, I know you think a lot about this because you're analyzing what office use looks like, and we're rapidly coming to this time where that may look different as leases expire, and business leaders get to kind of think about whether the configuration they've had will continue to serve them in the future. As you look out 3 to 5 years, what do you think it's going to look like?
So I think that one model that could arise is what they call the hub and spokes model. So we may have a headquarters there, and then in the suburbs, they will still be offering people to work there, either via like a WeWork type of place, where you feel like, as you said, you can't shut the door in your home, right? And your kid is disturbing you. I may want, to find a place where I could work from home, but closer to my home. And so the sub offices will be located in those areas, making use of the flex workplaces there. WeWork type, what else? Not the headquarters, but where you can just go and have your equipment there, kind of like your mini office. So I think that's one model that I think will evolve in the about 5 years from now, especially because of the cost of office space. So think about it. In DC, it costs $75 per square foot to rent an office. In Northern Virginia, it's $35 per square foot. Go down to Roanoke, and it's $15 per square foot. So two things really will drive that kind of a distributed workforce: the cost of office space, and just again, this work-life balance that companies would want to offer to their employees, for those that do want that. So I think the CBD will not die. The central business will remain there, but we'll see more office development spreading around the suburbs of that central business district.
One of the things that has been talked about in terms of trends, and I'm particularly interested in Rachel's thoughts on this, is and you just mentioned it, actually, Gay. Lower office rents in places like Southwest Virginia, which is a beautiful place to live and work. And what we've discovered during the pandemic is that for lots of jobs, not all jobs certainly, but for lots of jobs, it is not necessarily dependent on you showing up in person all the time, which put a lot of hope into places like Southwest Virginia, where the population is declining a bit, to really make that an attractive place to live. And I wonder, Rachel, are you seeing the impact of that yet, that people have discovered they could live in a place like Southwest Virginia, where the cost of living is quite low, comparatively speaking, and still work the job that they're working?
We are certainly starting to see that with real estate. We are starting to see people move in to Southwest Virginia because they can live here, and with the flexibility to be able to telecommute, they can retain their jobs and still live here and enjoy the lower cost of living and enjoy living in the rural area and all of the amenities that we have to offer as far as outdoor recreation. So we're certainly seeing that and trying to capitalize on that. You know, I think it will, and it will help with the commute. Sometimes where we are so geographically dispersed, sometimes it's very difficult. The commute times are very long. And so it's actually going to help companies in rural areas to be able to recruit, because there's a larger geographical area now that they can recruit from if they are telecommuting. And we're starting to see some of our businesses here explore that, maybe where they either have a hybrid, or they continue to let their folks telecommute, or make a decision as to which that they would rather do. And to add to what, you know, Gay was talking about with office space, we've even explored as our own agency, you know, we've become much more flexible about telecommuting. Do we need a full-time office space? Or could we share a space with another agency and help offset some of that rent and just be in the office the days that we have meetings or things we need to be face-to-face for, and then work from home the rest of the time? I don't think we're quite there yet, but we've been having that conversation. So, you know, I think you may see some of that trend as well.
Yeah, it's always been interesting to me. I don't know why nobody has come up with this yet. Maybe because it's just such a crazy idea. It's just out of the realm of possibility. But I've been really surprised that nobody has popped up with a request of the Internal Revenue Service for the tax year of 2020 that people be allowed to take the home office deduction if they could demonstrate that they were actually working from home, as so many of us were. Ann Bebo, I know that's probably a pipe dream, but I do wonder over time whether there are going to be some adjustments either in tax law or in employment law to accommodate for the fact that that people really are, in many cases, going to be using their homes as a place of business. And what do you think that does to licensing and taxation and all the rest of that? Nope. And I'm not hearing you. And I'm sure you're saying something entirely brilliant. So
there. Thank you. I tried to unmute myself, but it was locked. It wouldn't let me unmute myself.
No,
So that's an excellent issue that you brought up, Kathy. And I think we're all waiting for Congress to do something. And I would hope that they would recognize that the workplace has changed. They ought to bring back the home office deduction or institute it for W-2 workers, because so many of us had to use our homes as offices for most of 2020 and now into 2021. So I agree that's something that we need to see happen, and we'll have to wait on Congress for that.
Yeah, well, good luck. It sounds like they've got a lot on the agenda right now, but I'll just, you know, nothing happens until we start talking about it. So thank you for that, Ann. I appreciate that. I do think that's kind of you know, we've really been through a seismic shift in what our work circumstance is coming into this. One of our guests on the line says they disagree with regard to the issue of childcare shortages and not being available, saying that daycares have been open for quite some time, and it's their sense they have employees who are using this as an excuse, but the daycares are open. I will say that's a regional issue. Some are and some aren't. So that may be a regional point there. This is a great question, and let's send it over to Paula Hogg at the Hampton Roads Sanitation District. Is there any talk of employers providing stipends for work from home, for use of internet, electricity, that kind of thing? Paula, have you had any of your employees at HRSD talk to you about that?
Well, we have required many to work from home during the pandemic, you know, for the physical distancing and to keep everybody safe, and where it made sense. We did provide an internet stipend and a furniture allowance, but you know, moving forward, we'll have voluntary work from home where they'll request a schedule, and anybody we would require to work from home, we would provide a stipend, an internet stipend, as well as of furniture allowance. That's a one-time thing. So yes,
Yeah.
we've had those requests. We also have requests for things like extra monitors, things like that, and we do try to provide that.
I'm just curious, how did you make the decision on that about what to include? Were there other industry standards around that, or how did you make the decision around what to approve in that regard, and you know, and what not to include?
Yeah, we basically based on, you know, an average cost for internet. We relied on our IT division to sort of tell us that what would make sense. And we had customer care, you know, working remotely. So it's very important that, you know, they stay online and stay connected. So we thought it was
Yeah.
important to provide that. And we're
Yeah.
meeting virtually. You know, a lot of operational meetings are conducted virtually, and that's been very effective. And wow, that cuts a commute because we have a huge service area. So that's hours of driving to get to a meeting.
Yes.
So we'll take that forward as well.
That's an interesting point, because I think a lot of people who have discovered working from home have noted that, wow, look at the time savings you achieve by not having to commute. Are you, for those who are working in your offices, Paula, are you contemplating any sort of different office configuration moving forward?
Not right now, because we have a fair amount of space. So we don't really have a need for that. But if so, yeah, we would reconfigure. Our office buildings are new and pretty spacious. So we were able to, with requiring some to go home and some to stay, get the physical distancing in place, you know, and keep everybody safe through the pandemic.
Anne, I wonder, as you think about returning to the work site, what are maybe three pieces of advice that you are offering your clients to make sure they stay on the right side of the law? And I know you also care a lot about culture and the right thing to do in any case. So I wonder, as you're talking with your clients, what are you recommending that they keep top of mind at this time?
A lot of it is kind of brushing up on the requirements of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and your obligation as an employer to offer reasonable accommodations. And that comes up when you have employees who have health issues and employees who are unable to become vaccinated. And even with regard to your vaccinated employees, their status as vaccinated is medical information, and you need to safeguard that and keep it confidential. That's one of the main things that we're seeing a lot of businesses have issues around, as well as, you know, the vaccination issue that we've already discussed. And beyond that, we're just seeing a lot of, and this is kind of, you know, going into a different area, but Virginia had a lot of changes to its employment laws over the last year and a half. And so we're seeing a lot of employers who, because they were distracted with the pandemic, may not have realized those changes went into effect and need to get caught up on that, because there were some major changes for Virginia employers to be aware of.
And what are some of those major changes?
Sure. So one is there's a new law that pretty much makes it almost impossible to have independent contractors in Virginia. That creates a legal presumption that anyone performing work for remuneration is an employee. That's a big change. There is a new wage theft law that imposes very harsh consequences on employers if they aren't paying their employees the amount owed. There's an increase to the minimum wage that went into effect in May. It was postponed because of the pandemic, but it's now in place, and a lot of businesses aren't aware of those changes. Another important one is a new ban on non-compete agreements for so-called low wage earners, but low wage is defined in such a way that anyone making less than $60,000 qualifies as low wage earner under that law. So a lot of businesses who've had non-competes for all their employees before don't realize right now that that might be a problem. So there are a lot of changes that businesses didn't notice because of the pandemic, and so now they need to get caught up on that.
That is really interesting. I know, Paula, you all have done an interesting thing with regard to the graduated increase in minimum wage. What are you doing at HRSD?
So for all of our part-time positions, we adopted a $15 an hour minimum wage beginning July 1st, and then also for our full-time entry-level positions, ensuring that that wage is $15 an hour. And when we did a budget analysis, it was not a major impact on our budget at all. So we went ahead and adopted it.
Wow, that's really interesting. And I know that a number of businesses across the Commonwealth are sort of trying to figure out what that economic impact is going to be. So for you all, it really perhaps wasn't as much as you thought it might be.
Yeah, a lot of our part-time employees are seasonal, so that's a few months a year. And then it's really our entry-level positions that it impacted. So in the whole scheme
Really
of
interesting.
personnel services budget, it was very small.
Very, very interesting. So again, there's a chat. I'll remind you of that if you have thoughts or comments or questions that you want to get into the conversation. And you mentioned something, and I'm thinking maybe my response to it was indicative of exactly what you're talking about, which is the big changes that have happened that sort of escaped our attention while we were trying to buy hand sanitizer and recruit more cleaning workers in the office space. You said something about a change in independent contractor status. That's kind of interesting if you look at the sort of the collision between folks who are now figuring maybe I don't want to work full time for this employer and thinking, I have mad skills, I'll go ahead and be an independent contractor. But I think I just heard you say there have been some changes that suggest that independent contractor laws have tightened up.
Yes, Virginia passed the law last year, it went into effect last July, that created a legal presumption that anyone performing work for remuneration is an employee. And the burden of proof is on the employer to prove under the IRS test that the person is actually an independent contractor. So putting the burden of proof on the employer makes it challenging for employers to do that. So in many circumstances, it's very difficult to substantiate the independent contractor relationship. Of course, it's heavily fact dependent, and there are certainly still some legitimate independent contractors. But in the past, we would sometimes see businesses misuse or misclassify employees as independent contractors, sometimes as a transition type of role. I've seen employers say, well, for the first 90 days, she's an independent contractor. If it works out, I'll make her an employee. You can't do that. You couldn't do that before. The law was pretty clear before, but now it's absolutely, it's really clear. And what is very punitive about the law for employers that employers need to be aware of is if the individual is to sue the business saying, I was an employee, and by the way, it doesn't matter that the individual asked to be categorized as an independent contractor. If the individual were to sue the business, the individual could recover such things as back pay, overtime pay, which you probably weren't paying because you thought they were an independent contractor, and the costs that would have been covered by benefit plans that the employee would have had access to had he been properly classified as an employee. So imagine medical care. What if the person, your independent contractor, gets sick? What if she gets really sick? And if she'd been an employee, she would have been under your medical plan. Well, now you're going to have to pay for that medical cost if she prevails in proving in a lawsuit like that. So there are some serious consequences I think a lot of employers overlook. And now it's the time for businesses, as they are reconfiguring their workplaces to welcome people back, to really take a look at how they're doing things and make sure they're doing things properly.
So to that question, then does that mean if you were taking folks back and let's say you decided you were going to use somebody that you might have previously used as an independent contractor, does that mean that you just employ them and people could have as many as 5 or 6 employment positions? I guess I'm trying to figure that out from the formerly contractor's perspective.
Well, again, there are some situations that are legitimately independent contractors. It's very fact dependent, but I think in a lot of cases, employers would be better off putting the person on their payroll, making them a W-2 employee. And it can be a part-time job, that's fine. And then you can work out a part-time schedule, but they should, in many circumstances, not all, but in many circumstances, it would be safer for the employer to have them as a W-2.
That is really interesting. I don't know how many of the folks who are in our conversation today were aware of that, but I think that could have just as many implications moving forward as as many of these other issues we've been discussing, because certainly the folks have been deploying the independent contractor status in some ways that now appear to be problematic legally. So Ann Bebo, delivering extra value this morning, keeping you out of legal difficulty. Ann is an attorney with Van Deventer Black Law. And obviously, by the way, just to be clear, this doesn't constitute legal advice. You know, if you want advice about your particular thing, you should talk to your attorney or call Ann and engage her on that. But I always like to make that disclaimer. I would not take this conversation into a court of law and say, hey, well, they said on the executive discussion. That's not going to help you much. So do go ahead and check out all of this information with your attorney, because as Ann notes, you know, there are specific circumstances that relate to individual cases. So that is a fact. So as you look ahead, Rachel, at 3 to 5 years from now, your job and the job of great folks and workforce councils like you is to sort of look to the talent future. What are the future talent needs? What do we have? Where's the skills gap? And how do we close that? What are you most excited about from that perspective when you look at the next, say, 3 to 5 years or so?
I really just think that there's going to be a huge shift. We're watching some of the trends and some of the predictions that they're making as far as workforce, but we really don't have any data yet to know exactly how COVID is going to affect the workforce. But I do think that you're going to see, you know, increased flexibility on behalf of employers because, you know, we are in a tight labor market and they are having to compete for labor. So if you look at the younger generations, the millennials and younger, yes, they do want a sustainable wage that they can support their family on, but they're also looking for flexibility and other things in the workforce. So, you know, as businesses are trying to recruit, you know, that's an area that maybe they can give themselves a competitive edge, just looking at what are some of those other things that they can do to make their their workplace most attractive. So I think that you'll start seeing some of those shifts as we do get into a more competitive labor market. I think that you'll continue to see individuals shift around, as we saw during COVID. Maybe they didn't like the field that they were in, they've retrained. We've also, I know we've had a lot of small business closures, unfortunately, during COVID, but we've also had a lot of people that have seen a need and are opening small businesses. So we work with our small business development centers, and I know that they are slammed with individuals that are writing business plans and are deciding to start their own businesses to take care of some of these needs that they identified during COVID. So I think it's going to be a really exciting time, you know, to just see how this is going to play out over the next 3 to 5 years in our workforce.
It's a great point. Gay Kurorton, I know that you said that you were not seeing necessarily rents decrease, even though there is a significant amount of availability right now, but you were seeing landlords do deals or make concessions. And I wonder what some of those concessions look like. What is the commercial real estate industry doing to try to keep some of those folks in place, noting that they have a lot of empty office space at the moment?
Yeah, I think so. One clear concession is free rent. You know, 1 month rent. We're also seeing this in the residential apartment sector, the multifamily sector. Rents haven't fallen, but yeah, they're offering 2 or 3 months of free rent. That's a clear incentive. Also, the moving in costs, you know, so the landlords take more of the burden of remodeling the office space just to get people to come in. You know, I would imagine that, you know, they're the ones putting up the extra expense of you know, setting in place these cleaners, sanitation stalls, and even changing, you know, their HVACs, right? So your elevator, making them touchless, all these fixed costs. So I think that's how landlords and new buildings and offices like CBRE or your Cushman and Wakefield, that's how they're attracting the workforce to come back to their space. Like even WeWork is saying, used to be the WeWork was 60 feet per square foot. Now you go to their website and it's like, you know, it's no longer 60 feet per square foot. We have social distancing. We have this technology now that allows them to say, hey, this place was vacated already. No, somebody has to, it's vacated, somebody will go there and clean it up. So a lot of these fixed costs are being borne by the landlords just to get their workers, just to get people to list to them. That's one of the
So
cost savings.
the idea is, you want to try to open that conversation because you never know what sort of concessions are available for you to continue a great relationship until you open that conversation. Gay Kororitan, I want to thank you so much for being with us. Gay Kororitan is a senior economist who directs housing and commercial research for the National Association of Realtors. Thank you very much for being with us today. I really appreciate
glad
it.
to be here.
And Rachel Patton, I'm glad you introduced us to the beauties of Southwest Virginia in a moment where you can live anywhere and work in Southwest Virginia, live in Southwest Virginia and work anywhere. Man, that's a great place to be. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Paula Hogg, congratulations on being so in front of so many of these trends. Thank you for joining us today from the Hampton Roads Sanitation District. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And Ann Bebo, thank you for being with us from Van Deventer Black. Ann is a law partner and a specialist in labor and employment, and she gave us lots of great information today, including the latest on a court case, which will have something to do with how we go back to the work site, as I'm trying now hard to call it. Ann, thanks again for being with us today. I appreciate it.
Thanks, it was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you so much.
Thanks to all of you who are on the line this morning. You have some great questions. And again, you can, I would refer you to any of our guests today for further conversation if that's of interest to you. These conversations come to you quarterly from the good folks at Inside Business and Cox Business. And I'll tell you, first of all, they're free, which is great. Secondly, I can't think of one that I have had the privilege of facilitating over more than 10 years now where I haven't learned something that I could put to work right as soon as the call or the event was over. So I hope that's the case for you as well. So watch this space, as they say, for the next series. Be sure to share it with your friends because it's just good, free information that can help you do a better job of doing business in the Commonwealth. I'm Kathy Lewis. Thanks very much for being with us today, and we'll see you for the next executive discussion series.
Thank you so much.